we measure success from our proactive model, our well-being strategy on a really broad scale, and definitely not purely from a return on investment perspective only, which frankly really limits you and doesn't get at all the other meaningful reasons why you should support well-being and a play of proactivity. So we tend to focus on the changes we've seen to our culture of well-being at Telus, like stronger cultural norms that are emerging, more positive and engaging leadership practices. We see leaders building well-being into their annual business plans, just like any other business area focus. And so for us, that's a really good indicator of success and things that are changing in a positive way. We see more leaders, because we've created a lot more psychological safety, we see more leaders speaking out publicly about well-being related topics, about their own mental health experience on their social media channels. We've had various leaders, including recently an ELT member from Telus, an executive leader, that spoke out about his panic attack disorder. And that got such a great reception. And again, in an environment that's not safe, that doesn't happen. So for us, that's a great indicator that we're doing things well. It's just people organically talking about well-being in the organization, engaging in more conversations about well-being and mental health throughout the year more frequently. We hear from our team members all the time that that is having an impact on their feelings about the organization around reducing stigma around mental health. They feel like we're a caring organization, and that's impactful. It makes them want to continue to work with us, which is really important. And we're seeing it through things like our engagement survey. So there are tangible ways for us to measure it too. We're seeing it in measurements around sense of belonging or psychological safety, again, that are being measured through that engagement survey. We even see it in how our organizational values have changed. We're actually assessing leaders now on how well they support a psychologically safe environment for their team members. And that's another key way for us to measure success. And then there's the tangible ways, disability claims, lower rates of absenteeism, lower turnover rates. We're working towards those types of things. And generally hitting business success, like hitting targets, meeting KPIs, those are all indicators that people are happy and healthy in their workplace. And as an organization, we're overall a very healthy organization, which is leading to greater success as a business. And so those are some of the ways we think about measuring success, but we definitely have a significant cultural focus.
It's interesting. Janet brought up engagement surveys. They're a critical aspect in measuring your work, measuring how engaged your workforce is. But what we've done is augmented our engagement surveys to include a question around wellness. And we did that specifically because of COVID and the pandemic and the anxiety that the workforce was facing, or that all of our employees were facing. And it's a point in time measure about how they're feeling. And it tells us if, number one, we're listening. It tells us if managers are listening. It gives us a point in time to reference relative to what's going on. And it's really changed our perspective on wellness. I think the other thing that Janet mentioned was the idea of mental health, and the idea that that is part of a wellness program. And for years, it was sort of there if you needed it. But I think the reality is talking about it, encouraging the use of the resources, looking at your EFAP programs, looking at your use of Telus Health if you offer those services. We do. So we look at all of that data carefully because it helps inform us as to whether we have the right programs. And then I think the other thing is, along with physical health and mental health, there's financial health as part of a well-being strategy too, because I think we all understand that financial wellness is imperative to a person's overall well-being. And if there are stresses associated with that, it can manifest itself in other ways. So we take a three-prong approach, if you will, to understanding what the needs are for our employees, and then really having conversations about them each individually, but then sharing them as part of an umbrella solution to wellness.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this question around metrics. I enjoyed what you said, Janet, about focusing on culture and maybe some of those intangibles. I think when we start having these conversations and start making commitments in the wellness space, you do start to see lift around metrics that you are already tracking, which may be turnover, absenteeism, productivity. But one thing that we've noticed in our work with clients is participation. And what I mean by that is you may be running social events. You may be surveying your employees, especially in a remote environment, about any old thing. And we see lift in that type of participation. And you may recognize that behavior as engagement, but we see lift across the board when we start to have these conversations. And one kind of really, maybe not surprising, but pleasing piece that we noticed is, starting to talk about gathering diversity data. It's very uncomfortable for employees sometimes to participate in those surveys. And so the first time we did it, we did not see strong participation. As we started to focus more on wellness, focus more on the employee, we saw a huge lift in participation and was able to then grasp really good diversity data that allowed us to do things like focus on pay equity and other initiatives. And so I think just it's a little bit difficult to focus on a single metric and say my wellness plan is working. We are seeing across the board lift as we start to focus on these programs.
Thank you. And I wanted to add, picking up on something you mentioned, Janet, about vulnerability of one of your executives sharing their own mental health struggles. And I guess what I would say is no matter how solid your benefit offering is, if you don't create that culture of safety, doesn't matter that you're the most competitive employer when it comes to maternity top-ups and when it comes to wellness allowance and all the rest, right? As an employment lawyer, what I see is the results of not having a safety culture, no matter what a fabulous organization you are, right? So you're really putting money down the drain, and I mean this sincerely. You're wasting money to the point of Diana. Maybe you could only afford the Chevette and not the fancy one, but even that little money is going down the drain if you don't create a culture of safety. And how do you create that culture of safety? I'm surrounded by you smart ladies. It starts from the top. If your leaders are not emotionally intelligent, kind, vulnerable people, then it's not going to work, right? And no matter how wonderful your wellness offer is, if you have people at the top who are burning the candle on both ends, and that becomes the culture, you're going to have a culture of burnout, right? Where people don't feel like they can put their boundaries around themselves and work because the executives don't do it. And it's so tricky because sometimes being at the top comes with working really long hours and taking on really complex portfolios. But it is a cultural transformation that you have to embark on, right?